Somebody on Twitter said that Canadian Marxists have been particularly quiet when it comes to the issue of the death of Jose Sision. And they're right. In terms of Canadian Marxists, there has been a lot of silence. There's been, at least one from the CPC-ML supporting him, his legacy, etc. But in general, yes, the statement is actually true. There's been a lot of quiet from Canadian Marxists on his death. Here's the problem. And I know this is going to anger a lot of people, but as great as Sision is for building up the NPA to heights, he's also responsible for much of its crash to its low. And a lot of people who initially threw unending amounts of garbage at me for saying this, who are now admitting that they're right without apologizing to me for being completely ignorant and emotionally reacting like the fake Marxists that they are, is that Sision, for all intents and purposes, around the end of his life was a traitor. Think about it. I did a video on this a long time ago, a couple of years ago, where he started saying all the stuff that he wanted to do with Duterte. He wanted peace negotiations. Exactly why are you doing peace negotiations with the bourgeois state? As a communist revolutionary, you're supposed to overthrow it. You're not supposed to engage in peace negotiations. And in that famous recorded conversation between the two of them over, I think it was Skype or something like that, they were talking very highly of each other, Duterte and Sision, talking about how great they were, and Sision referred to Duterte as the Filipino Hugo Chavez. And to this day, people who mindlessly support the Communist Party of the Philippines have never actually come to terms with that, and instead have thrown unrelenting insults at me for having pointed out that the guy said this. Pointing out that someone did something unethical seems to be a bigger crime than doing something unethical itself. And I say that because I'm one of the few people who actually said something about this. Sision went out there and tried to engage in the peace negotiations with Duterte and talked glowingly about him and how he would be a good person to become the leader of the Philippines. Then Duterte won the election and did a complete 180 on Sision and then instituted literal military operations to wipe out the NPA. So all of that was for nothing. Sision was pandering to this psychopath because someone who goes around and brags about having murdered drug addicts is apparently the Filipino Hugo Chavez, because that's something that Chavez did, was kill the poor, right? That sounds anyway. And once it became clear that he was just using Sision for aesthetic purposes, Sision turned on him and said, oh, he's a fascist, he's literally a fascist, which you could make a very good case that he was a fascist along with being a complete psychopath. But think about that. If that's what you thought about this guy, and then continued to push for peace negotiations afterward, what does that say about Sision? He wanted peace negotiations with a fascist? He wanted to have negotiations to end the entire Filipino revolution. That's what the peace talks were for, was to lay down arms and stop fighting. That's what you do with fascists? You try to come to an agreement to stop fighting them? At least in a physical sense. I'm sure that there would be a continuation of opposing Duterte in the legal system, which is the legal system and the political system, which is already controlled by the bourgeoisie, so it won't go anywhere. And if you have to understand why voting and participating in the system doesn't work, you clearly haven't read even the most basic Marx, let alone Lenin. I think that's the point of contention. A lot of people recognize, maybe a lot of Canadians recognize this, and they're divided on saying something, because historically, if you just mindlessly cheerlead this guy, these unfortunate facts are eventually going to come up and show that you had no integrity when you were cheering him. What's important here is to recognize the good he did and recognize the harm that he did, and his harm was significant. literally trying to create an alliance, a peace negotiation with a fascist. Is that what the Soviet Union did? Created an alliance with the fascists? No, the Molotov-Ribbentrop thing does not count. That was a temporary ceasefire so the Soviet Union could better prepare for World War II. Not to mention, because people never mentioned it, the fact that entire capitalist countries signed outright alliances with Nazi Germany, whereas Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had a temporary ceasefire. But it's the Soviet Union that's bad in this case. So understand, well, yeah, he did a lot of the leadership for the NPA and brought them from the brink of being destroyed in the 80s and brought them up to better heights during the 90s and the 2000s. But let's also not forget that he tried to destroy them as well. He tried to enter a peace negotiation, a peaceful coexistence with a fascist government, in his own words, fascist government. But that's a part that none of these people are talking about. And I think a lot of the Canadian communists, they probably are thinking about that too. They're just not saying it, because they know what's going to happen if you criticize anyone like this. Well, they instantly call you all kinds of revisionist thing, traitor, blah, blah, blah. You see, that's one of the things about me being a third worldist, that I have been unafraid to criticize third world movements and third world movement leaders. And yet we get accused of just simply being mindless cheerleaders for anything that's third world. Yet it is the non-third worldists who are pandering to this guy, who are not being critical of what he's done wrong, and completely looked the other way on some of the crimes that he's committed against his own party. Because we can be critical about third world struggles, especially when they do something horribly reactionary. We can't stand there and say, oh, don't do violence because blah, 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 liberal nonsense. But they are available to be criticized. Because I don't think I should have to tell you what happens when you have something that cannot be criticized. You start having something like Trump and his followers, as an example. So recognize the good that Sision did, and also recognize the bad that he did. Because that would be the honest way of looking at it. That would be the scientific way of looking at it. And after all, we're supposed to be scientific socialists. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.